Hello, and welcome to today's webinar from Practical Ecommerce, e-commerce winners and losers from COVID-19. My name is Phil Masiello. I'm a regular contributor to Practical Ecommerce with a focus on Amazon selling. I founded several e-commerce brands, including Raw Beauty with Carol Alt, 800razors.com, and New Peptin Skincare, and have been a multi-million-dollar seller on the Amazon Marketplace since 2007. I'm also the founder of Crunch Growth Revenue Acceleration Agency, focused on helping brands scale their businesses on the entire e-commerce ecosystem with a specialty on the Amazon Marketplace. I apologize if I sound a little wheezy today. My allergies are out of control. COVID-19 has rapidly and dramatically changed the e-commerce landscape. It has also altered consumer behavior in the short term with long-term implications. In this webinar, we'll review what categories and products were affected by the pandemic, whether or not these are temporary, what it taught us about the supply chain, what are the long-term societal changes and effects, and finally, what are the lessons we can learn from Amazon. At the end of 2019, e-commerce still only represented less than 20% of all U.S. retail sales. Some categories, such as grocery, beauty, fashion, and fitness, lagged further behind that penetration. COVID-19 may turn out to be the inflection point that changed consumers' e-commerce behavior and catapulted several categories into the e-commerce mainstream. But is the extended supply chain equipped to handle it? In an 8-week period, e-commerce sales grew faster than they had in the prior 2 decades. Once the restrictions are lifted, we see this trend continuing as contactless shopping becomes more the norm. So let's take a look at what happened to specific e-commerce categories during the pandemic and what other changes we can expect going forward. Many people began preparing and stocking up for COVID-19 in January once the outbreak began. Consumers began hoarding personal protective equipment, masks, gloves, sanitizers, so much so that there were not enough for the hospitals, healthcare workers, and nursing homes. And we've all heard about the price gougers and hoarders that forced Amazon, Walmart, and Google to restrict sellers from listing and advertising these items at any price. And we can't forget the 2 brothers in Tennessee who hoarded some of these items, raised their prices, and then when Amazon took their listings down for price gouging, they went to the press and tried to come across as victims. But the Attorney General didn't see it that way, and they were forced to donate their entire inventory to keep from being sued. Price gouging, especially in a crisis, is never a good idea for business. Then in late February, consumers began hoarding paper towels, toilet tissue, and other essential items. It got very bad very quick and caught the supply chain, retailers, and e-commerce by surprise. The food supply chain could not replenish fast enough, and store shelves were empty of the necessities for months. The food supply chain in this country is not prepared to replenish 100% of the stores every week. It just wasn't built that way. Amazon Fresh, Instacart, Peapod, and other delivery services couldn't fill the orders that they were getting, and deliveries were pushed off for weeks in some areas. We're only now seeing normalcy in that supply chain, but it's still not completely what we're used to. Some categories saw tremendous e-commerce growth and are continuing to show growth even as restrictions are being lifted. Baby products continue to move to e-commerce because consumers don't want to get caught short. Retail store closings affected baby hard goods and soft goods, while grocery store shortages affected baby food products. Amazon made it an essential category for both sellers and consumers to do their best to ensure the supply chain can handle the demand. Food and grocery was one of the biggest e-commerce winners. Online food has never achieved what it was expected in the early 2000s. If any of you remember Webvan, which was supposed to handle the consumer e-commerce grocery onslaught, which never happened, went out of business and lost billions in a 2-year period. Consumers were just not comfortable with other people shopping for their groceries until now. Grocery stores are limiting the number of shoppers in the store at the same time, which is causing lines out the door. They changed the checkout so there's sufficient distance between shoppers. Along with consumers' hesitancy to visit retail stores in general, this is leading to a reliance on online grocery delivery services like Amazon Fresh, Instacart, and others. Video game sales were the highest in a decade, $1.8 billion in sales in March as families were quarantined, schools moved to online, but kids still needed entertainment. Microsoft Teams added 55 million subscribers in March and April. Google Meet has been adding about 3 million users per day in March and April, both capitalizing on Zoom security issues as businesses had to react to working from home. This also drove the rapid increase in sales of office furniture and other home office equipment. And when consumers could no longer go to their gyms, the sales of home fitness equipment skyrocketed. Along with this were the content providers who quickly adapted to having their yoga, their cycling, rowing, and other fitness classes online. Working from home also impacted the travel-related categories as business travel decreased to near zero. Fashion was impacted as consumers no longer had to purchase office wear. Gas prices are the lowest they've been in 2 decades. Less wear and tear and usage on cars is affecting the auto parts industry as well. Remote working is not going to stop, at least not in the near term, as many companies have already stated that workers can work from home through the end of the year. Once companies realize that they can be effective working remotely, it's going to change the entire office dynamic and all the pieces and components that are attached to it. Meanwhile, brick and mortar retail and food services have lost approximately $120 billion in sales from the lockdown, wiping out a decade of sales growth. Restaurants and other food service providers have had to adapt to a model of takeout and delivery. Retailers are going to have to figure out a way to operate in a contactless society, but neither category is expected to recover fully in the next few years. So is it a historic shift? Where there's a crisis, there's opportunity, and some of the above categories that we mentioned will continue to thrive. Grocery, food, drug, household, they'll continue to grow online. However, brick and mortar retail stores in these categories are expected to contract. Walgreens, CVS, supermarket chains, they all already have been announcing closings this year. The effect is going to be more heavy reliance on shipping to fulfill these increase in orders. Department stores, JCPenney, Macy's, and others have announced major store closings, as well as office supply stores, specialty stores, hardware stores, craft stores. So these categories will thrive online, but it may take up to 4 years for these categories to recover what they had already lost at the brick and mortar side. The restaurant industry will have to pivot to a different model, but even with these changes, the industry is not expected to recover for at least 3 years. Online meal delivery companies like Blue Apron, which have struggled in the past because of high consumer acquisition costs, they may just find a profitable model now. The travel and leisure industry, including airlines, car rental companies, and hotels, they're not expected to recover for at least 2 years. And bankruptcy filings have already occurred in this channel. Work from home is here to stay. Over 85% of the industries plan to make work from home a long-term strategy. Software, IT, finance, media, communications, design, public administration. And the effect is going to be, it's going to affect gas prices, going to affect gas usage, and the positive effect of that is going to be on pollution. Less cars on the road will lead to a decline in auto sales and auto repair costs. Home office equipment is going to continue to increase as workers further outfit their homes. And home fitness equipment and fitness content will continue to rise. Even after the gyms reopen, most consumers are not going to flock back. And they've gotten comfortable working out, and they've figured out a routine how to do their exercise at home. I think business meetings are going to continue to be driven online. In-person meetings may become fewer and fewer. And an entirely new industry of online conventions will emerge as businesses and people stay away from large groups. Fashion and jewelry will continue to be affected as less people have to dress to work in an office environment. So e-commerce is going to have to fill the void to meet the demand for products and services that brick and mortar stores provided, as consumers won't want the hassle of going or the worry of going to stores to shop. So e-commerce sellers will need to learn from what just happened to their extended supply chain in order to thrive in the next wave of growth. COVID-19 disrupted the entire supply chain, causing merchants to rethink traditional inventory sources, delivery options, and warehousing. While consumers were quarantined and moved to e-commerce to their needs, we saw the stresses on the supply chain, and it happened faster than anyone could imagine. Medical supplies were the first to feel the stress, as governments all around the world tried to obtain more masks, ventilators, gloves, sanitizer. China factories had shut down, so no one knew where to get the supplies and what the demand and the supply actually were. Consumer goods were the next to spike in demand. Suddenly, grocery stores were out of pasta, eggs, flour, milk, dried beans, and toilet paper, just to name a few. Fitness equipment, treadmills, bikes, rowers were sold out as consumers could no longer go to the gym. Home office equipment became difficult to get. Because the spike in demand was so high that resupply was near impossible. This unexpected increase rippled through the supply chain and pointed out the glaring weaknesses for business. Although many businesses experienced tremendous sales in March and April, by late April and May it became apparent that they were having trouble resupplying and costing themselves sales. Overseas supply may not have been the best decision when spikes like this occur. Many sellers and retailers still have not recovered and are expecting supply to come in July or August. So whatever sales they picked up in March and April, they were lost in May and June waiting for inventory. Not to mention the increased shipping costs occurring in less overseas freight options being available. Less planes, less ships coming in. Delivery of goods to buyers slowed to a crawl. Suddenly Amazon Prime same-day delivery was sort of tossed aside. In some parts of the country, they still haven't recovered. Additionally, some companies and sellers couldn't sell their products because marketplaces like Amazon and Walmart began prioritizing essential products for the consumer, but also because their warehouses couldn't handle the onslaught. Other e-commerce sellers were stuck because many 3PLs couldn't fulfill orders due to quarantine. So once this pandemic passes and businesses begin to function somewhat normally, the lowest cost supply chain with minimal inventory levels will be a thing of the past, primarily because the economy is not going to be stable for quite some time. I've always been a firm believer in keeping my manufacturing as close to the primary sales channel as possible. So when you account for additional transportation costs, the extended transportation turnaround time, the inability to react to changing sales situations, and the unforeseen overseas manufacturing, it turns out to be a terrible solution. Again, many companies had tremendous sales growth opportunities over the last 3 months, but they couldn't take advantage of them because they either couldn't get replenishment due to border quarantines, couldn't get components coming from overseas, or the manufacturers overseas were shut down. And by the time they get replenished, someone's already going to be taking over and taking advantage of the opportunity and stepped in. So I think there's going to be many adjustments to modern life. Commuting, education, shopping, commercial real estate, they'll likely remain after COVID-19, or at least until a vaccine is developed. Scientists, medical professionals see a second round of illnesses coming around September. In a study by Statista conducted from May 4th through 10th, even after restrictions are lifted, over half of U.S. consumers say they'll stay away from malls, retail stores, restaurants, bars, concerts, sporting events, movies, beauty salons. What this means is businesses will need to rethink their customer delivery model. There will be a further reliance on e-commerce, but with the services that customers are used to getting from brick and mortar stores. So retail will move to more of a contactless system. Remote store service via mobile, shelf monitoring will get smarter to reduce contact, self-cleaning tools will be employed more regularly, as will virtual try-ons in apparel, contactless checkout will all become the norm. And as apparel and beauty sales move further online, sellers will need to develop systems for virtual samplings and try-ons. Similar to what's happening in the online eyeglass channel, accuracy of color palettes, sizing charts, body scanning apps will all need to be refined for customers to trust them and buy from them. So e-commerce will become stronger as consumer demand remains strong, but with less brick and mortar stores available to supply. So what did we learn from the way Amazon handled it? Because Amazon was the big recipient of e-commerce growth during this pandemic. Amazon got hit very hard when the stay-at-home orders began. However, it was clear that Prime and same-day delivery were not sustainable with the 30% increase in new customers generating orders. So consumers became very patient with shipping delays up to a point. They were just happy to know their product was coming. But Amazon also moved quickly to eliminate price gougers and unethical sellers. Sure, some slipped through the cracks, but they were eventually taken down. But Amazon's response and recovery plan was to focus on the essential categories the customers needed: medical products, baby, food and grocery, pet products, health, beauty, personal care, household cleanings. These were the essential categories. For FBA sellers, Amazon stopped receiving replenishment orders for anything other than non-essential categories. They also delayed shipping of non-essential items for over 6 weeks. This had a very negative effect on some of the sellers' ability to sell. People who were solely reliant, FBA sellers who were solely reliant on Amazon, it basically put them out of business for a period of about 6 weeks. However, this gave Amazon the ability to prioritize replenishment orders into their warehouses and shipments out to the customer. Several other online retailers followed the same suit with prioritization. Merchant-fulfilled sellers could still take orders on Amazon and ship product. However, their ability to fulfill orders was constrained by geography. If the fulfillment warehouse was in a city that classified them as non-essential, then their 3PL was closed down and the merchant-fulfilled sellers couldn't ship product. And when Amazon did allow replenishment orders into the warehouse for the essential categories, they limited the amount that could be sent of each item. It wasn't until late April and early May that replenishment became somewhat normalized for FBA sellers. Amazon had to take these steps or the warehouses would have ground to a halt with the increased demand. Amazon Fresh became so overwhelmed that Amazon stopped taking new customers in early April. What started out as same-day delivery became 3 days out and then 1 week out, but the out-of-stocks were running at a 50 to 60% range. It took Amazon Fresh about 4 weeks in most areas to recover, but out-of-stocks continue today, and they're hovering around 20% for many items in the grocery category. And this has more to do with the manufacturers being able to resupply in a timely manner. So the food supply chain, again, was not built to resupply every store in the U.S. at the same time. And we have plant shutdowns due to COVID that are still continuing today. Shipping to the consumer across the country was slow, experiencing major delays. Shipping internationally was near impossible for about 2 months. Amazon did a pretty good job of communicating with sellers and consumers about what they were doing and how they were handling each step. But as bad as it seemed for sellers and consumers, Amazon still rated the highest in consumers' mind for their response to the pandemic, followed by Costco and Walmart. In terms of sales growth, Amazon was the big winner from the pandemic. Sales were up 26% in the first quarter over last year, and they expect an even greater increase in the second quarter. However, increased costs for both product and shipping are going to decline their profit. And Amazon is facing increased scrutiny from the government over counterfeit goods and other monopolistic behaviors. So what does that mean? It means changes at Amazon are inevitable. Resellers will likely be discouraged in the future on the Amazon marketplace. There'll be a stronger focus on brands as the seller. The negative publicity from price gougers, hoarders, counterfeit sellers far outweigh the need for more sellers on Amazon. Thus, sellers can expect more hurdles to listing their products. If you're not building a brand and are just reselling other brand products or playing online arbitrage, we foresee Amazon restricting what you'll be able to do on that site. So to recap, we discussed the products and categories that were affected by the pandemic, and we can learn a lot from the product and categories that grew and declined during the pandemic. The data shows us what the consumers truly value when crises happen. Sellers in these growth categories need to focus on building a flexible supply chain so they can remain in stock. They also need to rely on more than one channel to sell their products or provide options in the event of a round 2 or another type of crisis in the future. We discussed whether some of the consumer behaviors are temporary changes while others are likely to be normal. Clearly, social distancing is not going away. People are going to continue to take precautions. Work at home will become more of a norm than working in offices, which will have a continued impact on the automobile category, the work at home category, communication tools, home fitness, anything to do with remote product, remote content, remote delivery. The third part, supply chain, the lowest cost, lowest supply chain model is not going to work any longer. The lost sales from an inability to resupply during sales spikes far outweighs the low cost of overseas manufacturing. A flexible supply chain model is more likely to be the norm of successful e-commerce in the future. Social changes such as contactless shopping, a resistance to crowd, the inconvenience of limits at brick and mortar retail will continue to push e-commerce to higher levels. Having the right sources of supply and the right shipping partners will define future success as much as the brand and customer service. And Amazon has shown us that the customer appreciates prioritization during a time of crisis. Consumers are willing to flex on rapid shipping as long as they're kept informed of ship dates and inventory. But Amazon cannot handle the entire e-commerce demand. It's time for e-commerce sellers to improve their game and take advantage of the next wave of growth.